At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's General G. Let's begin. When news reached the Sativ homeworld that the Vox Empire had declared war on Earth, Commander Abi mobilized all 300 ships under his command to rush to their human allies' aid. But just as they were about to enter Earth's space, he discovered a troubling issue, and the culprits were none other than his own engineering team. Abi paced across the bridge of his flagship, his small paws making soft pattering sounds against the metal deck plating. Back and forth he walked, his compact, round body moving imposingly. His bright orange fur was immaculately groomed, each strand in place, projecting the image of a commander who had everything under control. His disproportionately large eyes scanned the bridge crew with what he hoped was an intimidating gaze, though the effect was somewhat diminished by how those eyes made him look perpetually startled. His wide mouth was set in a firm line, revealing just the tips of his tiny pointed teeth, a fierce expression by Sativ standards. His antennae, those distinctive stalks sprouting from his head with their fluffy pom-poms at the tips, stood rigid and unwavering. He continued pacing, letting the silence build. Finally, after what felt like an appropriately dramatic amount of time, Abi stopped directly in front of Bib, the ship's chief engineer. Bib was slightly taller than Abi, with vibrant green fur that matched his large, nervous eyes. Those eyes were currently fixed on the deck plating, refusing to meet Abi's gaze. Abi stared down at him. Well, technically, he stared slightly horizontally at him, since they were nearly the same height, and demanded in his sternest voice, "Explain to me, Chief Engineer Bib, why your engineering team converted our primary armory into what your department is calling a human-sized fridge." Bib's antennae drooped so low that his pom-poms nearly touched his shoulders. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Small squeaking sounds emerged, but no actual words. Abi turned his gaze to the other engineers clustered nearby. 5 of them stood in a small, colorful huddle, green fur, blue fur, purple fur, yellow fur, and one with pink and white stripes. All of them were suddenly fascinated by the floor. Their antennae had wilted completely, pom-poms dragging against their suits. "Well?" Abi's voice rose in pitch, which unfortunately made him sound less intimidating and more like a squeaky toy. He cleared his throat and tried again, deeper. "How do you expect this fleet to be useful in guarding humanity against the Vox Empire if we don't have the weapons to protect Earth?" The question lingered in the air like an accusation. The bridge had gone completely silent. Finally, Bib found his voice. It came out small and apologetic, his words tumbling over each other in their rush to escape. "Commander, we thought, that is, the flagship would land on Earth first, right? To coordinate with the humans, to discuss strategy." His antennae moved hopefully. "So we thought it would be no harm to use a bit of that time to buy some ice cream for our families while we were there." The other engineers nodded vigorously, their heads bobbing in a wave of colorful agreement. "We have families, sir," one of them piped up. "Children. They've been asking about Earth ice cream ever since we returned." "My mate's been dreaming about cotton candy," another added.
"The young ones want to try pizza,"
said a third. Abi felt his eye twitch. His carefully maintained expression of command authority was cracking. Inside, his thoughts raged in a torrent of disbelief and fury. "How can these officers ignore their duty and just think about ice cream? We're rushing to help humanity in a war. The Vox Empire has declared hostilities. This is serious. This is our chance to repay Earth for everything they've done for us, for taking us in when we were refugees, for recapturing our homeworld from the pirates, for treating us with dignity when everyone else laughed. And these... His thoughts stuttered to a halt as an unbidden memory surfaced. The taste of chocolate ice cream melting on his tongue. The way that strawberry flavor had exploded in his mouth with sweet intensity. The incredible smoothness of vanilla. The refreshing coolness of mint chocolate chip. Abby's mouth watered involuntarily. His antennae wavered slightly before he caught himself. "No, focus! This is about military discipline. This is about proper conduct. This is about... How long until we reach Earth?" Abby snapped, turning away from the engineers to face General Lax and Izzy. The two generals had been standing apart from the disciplinary discussion, wisely not involving themselves in Abby's dressing down of the engineering team. General Lax, his purple fur with its distinctive white veteran stripes, looking particularly dignified, checked his console before responding. "We're receiving landing clearance now, Commander. The humans have given us permission to land at the usual coordinates, the stadium where we stayed before. However," General Izzy added, her bright pink fur rippling as she adjusted her stance, "it appears the humans don't know we're coming to help with the war. The transmission we received was standard civilian landing clearance, not military coordination protocols." Both generals exchanged a glance before Lax continued, his voice diplomatic. "We would advise speaking with Ambassador Hampton after we land, Commander. You could formally offer the protection of our armada and request assignment to a position alongside the human military forces, perhaps a joint operation briefing?" Abby felt his antennae perk up. That made sense. Of course the humans wouldn't know their intentions yet. The Sativ fleet had traveled as quickly as possible, and long-range communications across that distance were expensive and unreliable. George would understand once Abby explained in person. "Yes, good. That's the plan." Abby nodded firmly, his pom-poms bouncing with the motion. "We'll coordinate directly with Ambassador Hampton. He'll know how best to deploy our forces." He glanced back at the engineers, who were still huddled together looking guilty. A thought occurred to him, and he gestured with one small paw at Lax and Izzy. "Generals, a word in private, please." He led them to a corner of the bridge, far enough from the other crew members that their conversation wouldn't be overheard. Once they were relatively isolated, Abby's stern expression cracked, replaced by genuine concern. "How, exactly?" he asked in a low voice. "Was the engineering team planning to obtain this ice cream? We haven't properly established formal trade relationships with humanity yet. Our species are still in the early stages of diplomatic and economic integration." His antennae drooped with worry. "Are they planning to impose on the humans again, even though this time we came to offer help rather than need it?" General Lax's expression softened with something that might have been amusement. His antennae tilted in a gesture that conveyed reassurance. "Most of the engineering team obtained human currency during our previous visit to Earth, Commander. It is quite legitimate. They've now gathered everything they have and are planning to use it to purchase enough ice cream to fill their, human-sized fridge with treats for their families." Abby blinked. "They have human currency? How did they obtain it?" General Izzy's pink fur rippled in what was definitely suppressed laughter. "They asked the humans to give it to them, sir, and the humans gave it to them." Just like that?" "Just like that." Izzy's antennae bobbed. "Apparently, several humans found them adorable and gave them what they called tips and spending money." "One of them," Lax added, his voice carefully neutral, "apparently sat in a park and played a traditional Sativ instrument for 3 hours. Humans kept putting currency in a container in front of him. He made enough to buy ice cream for his extended family." Abby rubbed his face with both paws, feeling a headache building behind his large eyes. His voice came out muffled through his paws. "So our well-trained, highly educated engineering officers were reduced to begging?" "They prefer to call it cultural exchange," Izzy offered helpfully. Abby dropped his paws and looked up at his generals with an expression of pure frustration. His antennae drooped completely. This is a disgrace. It's shameful that well-paid engineers with years of training are reduced to accepting handouts from humans. This only serves to reinforce the already poor image the other species have of our people." He straightened, his antennae rising with renewed determination. "This time will be different. This visit to Earth will be conducted with proper military protocol and diplomatic dignity. We'll keep everything official and professional. There will be no ice cream distractions." Both generals nodded, though Abi thought he detected skepticism in their expressions. "Of course, Commander," Lax said diplomatically.
"Whatever you say, sir,"
Izzy agreed. Abi wasn't entirely convinced they believed him, but it didn't matter. He was determined. This time would be different. Permissions and landing procedures had been trivial after so many visits to Earth. The humans recognized the Sativ ship signatures immediately and guided them to the same stadium landing zone they'd used before. The 300 ships descended in their usual formation, touching down on the field in complete coordination. This time, however, Abi was very clear in his orders. "All personnel will remain in their ships," he announced over the fleet-wide channel, his voice projecting command authority. "I repeat, everyone stays aboard their vessels. I will personally negotiate the terms of our military assistance with Ambassador Hampton. We need to establish proper protocols, where the humans would prefer to have our fleet positioned, what role we'll play in their defensive strategy, coordination procedures with human military forces. This is a military operation, not a social visit. Stay at your stations. Maintain combat readiness. Commander Abi, out." He stood in front of the hatch of his flagship, adjusted his combat suit one final time, checked that his antennae were projecting appropriate dignity, and commanded the ramp to lower. Earth's sunlight washed over him as he descended. The Earth smelled the same as before, that complex mixture of growing things and distant city and something indefinably Earth. And there, standing at the edge of the field, was George Hampton. The human ambassador looked exactly as Abi remembered, tall, dark-haired, with kind eyes, and that gentle smile that somehow made you feel both safe and slightly patronized at the same time. He wore casual clothing today rather than his formal diplomatic suit, which Abi wasn't sure how to interpret. Abi marched across the grass with his small legs moving as quickly as dignity allowed. When he reached George, he had to crane his neck back to look up at the towering human's face. "Ambassador Hampton," Abi began formally, his voice amplified by his suit's external speakers. "The Sativ fleet has come to offer military assistance to Earth in your war efforts against the Vox Empire. We are here not as conquerors, as we once foolishly claimed, and not as refugees seeking aid, as we recently were, but as friends who help each other in times of need. Our armada stands ready to be deployed whenever you need us most." George scratched his head, a gesture Abi was learning meant the human was uncertain or confused. The ambassador's eyes scanned across the rows of Sativ ships, each one a bit larger than a human transport vehicle, but smaller than proper military warships. Abi knew what George was seeing. 300 ships, each housing hundreds of Sativ warriors, most of them armed with laser rifles and traditional blade weapons. Well, 299 ships were bristling with weapons. The flagship's weapon complement was currently reduced due to the ice cream refrigeration situation, but George didn't need to know that. "Commander Abi," George said slowly, and there was something in his tone that Abi couldn't quite read. "We appreciate the gesture, we really do, but we have 300 ships," Abi continued enthusiastically, his antennae bobbing. "Thousands of trained warriors. Our weapons may not be as advanced as human technology, but we're skilled and brave. We can provide support, or take a position in your defensive perimeter, or—" "Abi," George interrupted gently, "Earth isn't exactly facing a crisis right now. This isn't really a time of need." Abi's antennae drooped slightly in confusion. "But the Vox Empire declared war." "Yes, they did," George's expression was oddly calm. And the human military will soon teach the Vox Empire exactly why humans have such a bad reputation in the galaxy. We've dealt with hostile species before. The Vox are, well, they're not exactly in the same league as some of the threats we've faced. He knelt down, bringing himself closer to Abby's level, though he still towered over the small commander. There is no reason for the Sativ to risk your ships in this instance. Your people have been through enough. You just got your homeworld back. You're still rebuilding. We can't ask you to throw yourselves into a conflict that we can easily handle on our own. Abby's thoughts went wild, spiraling into panic. The humans didn't need them. They'd come all this way, mobilized their war fleet, rushed across space to help their greatest allies, and the humans didn't need them. How would they ever repay humanity's generosity? How could they prove they were worthy friends rather than perpetual charity cases? His large eyes went wide. He felt them growing watery despite his best efforts to maintain composure. His antennae drooped completely, pom-poms dragging against his shoulders. So you don't need our help? His voice came out so small and broken. Is it because of our size? Is it because humanity doesn't trust us? Do you think we're not capable, not brave enough, not... Whoa, hey now. George's expression shifted to alarm. He knelt further, practically lying on the pavement to bring his face closer to Abby's eye level. It's not that at all, little buddy. One of George's large hands reached out and gently patted Abby's head, right between his antennae. The touch was warm and comforting, despite being almost comically oversized compared to Abby's small head. Listen to me, George said softly. Your people have never trained alongside human military forces. Our ships use different communication protocols, different tactical formations, different weapon systems. If we threw you into a combat situation without proper integration and training, it would be complicated and potentially dangerous. Not because you're not brave or capable, but because coordination takes practice. Abby looked down at his small paws, feeling dejected. His antennae hung so low that his pom-poms were touching the ground. All his determination, all his plans to repay humanity's kindness, crumbling into nothing. Then George continued, his voice brightening slightly. However, if you want to stay on Earth's surface and help in other ways that aren't on the front lines, humanity would be glad to have your assistance. There are always ways friends can help each other that don't involve combat. Abby's head snapped up so fast, his antennae whipped through the air, pom-poms bouncing. His eyes widened with renewed hope. Yes, we can do that. We can help in any way you need, anything at all. His voice rose with enthusiasm, his small paws gesturing wildly. What do humans need? Logistics support? Supplies? Medical assistance? We have engineers, technicians, medics, whatever you need. George's smile widened into something warmer and more genuine. How about you do me a favor first? He stood up, brushing off his knees. Come meet someone who's been dying to see you but never got the chance. Abby's enthusiasm faltered slightly. His antennae tilted in confusion and a bit of suspicion. Meet someone? Right now? But what about coordinating our assistance? What about... There will be ice cream while we talk, George said casually. We can discuss ways the Sativ can help humanity over some dessert. Much more civilized that way. Abby's antennae shot straight up so fast they made a whistling sound through the air. His eyes lit up. Yes, absolutely. That sounds like an excellent plan. Very diplomatic, very professional. He was already moving towards George's vehicle before he even finished speaking. Lead the way, Ambassador. 1 hour later, after a car ride through human city streets that left Abby clutching the seat with all 4 paws, and an elevator journey that made his stomach do uncomfortable things, Abi found himself standing in front of what was, to someone of his size, an enormous apartment door. "This is my home," George said, fishing keys out of his pocket. "We'll talk here, more comfortable than some official building." Abi nodded, his antennae swiveling nervously. He wasn't sure what to expect. Why would George bring him to his personal residence rather than a diplomatic office? Was this some kind of trap? No, that was ridiculous. George had been nothing but kind. Still, the uncertainty made his fur bristle slightly. George opened the door, and immediately a voice called out from inside, high-pitched and excited.
"You really brought him, Dad?"
Abi barely had time to register the words before his vision filled with a young human female who appeared in the doorway. She looked down at him. Everyone looked down at him on Earth. Such was the curse of being Sativ, and her face transformed into an expression of pure delight.
"Oh, how cute!"
For a moment, Abi felt like he'd been led into a trap. Not a dangerous trap, but perhaps a more insidious one. The young human's eyes sparkled with the same expression humans got when they looked at baby animals or particularly fluffy toys. "Commander Abi," George said formally, gesturing between them. "This is my daughter, Emily. Emily, this is Commander Abi of the Sativ fleet." Abi appreciated that George used his title. It made him feel slightly more dignified, slightly more professional. He straightened his posture and prepared to give a formal greeting befitting his rank. Emily immediately crouched down and asked excitedly,
"Can I pet him?"
Abi's carefully prepared formal greeting died in his throat. His antennae drooped in consternation. He turned his large eyes toward George, silently pleading for diplomatic intervention. George's expression was carefully neutral, but there was amusement dancing in his eyes. "We could discuss the details of how the Sativ might assist Earth's war efforts while you enjoy some ice cream with my daughter," George said diplomatically. "That is, if you want to, of course. No pressure, purely optional." Abi stared at the young woman. She was smiling at him with such genuine excitement that it was hard to feel offended. And George had mentioned ice cream. Again. The memory of chocolate melting on his tongue's surface unbidden. The way Emily might have different flavors. The possibility of trying something new. His mouth watered traitorously. That would be acceptable," Abi managed to say, his voice coming out smaller than he intended. "For diplomatic purposes, to facilitate discussion."
"Yay!"
Emily clapped her hands together. Before Abi quite knew what was happening, he found himself scooped up from the floor. The sensation of being picked up by something so much larger than himself never stopped being slightly alarming. But Emily's hands were gentle, cradling him carefully as she carried him further into the apartment. Within minutes, literal minutes, Abi found himself in a situation he could never have imagined when he'd set out to help humanity fight a war. He was sitting in Emily's lap. The young human woman was seated at a kitchen table, and Abi was positioned on her legs, like some kind of living stuffed animal. One of her arms curved around him, holding him securely, while her other hand wielded a spoon. On the table in front of them sat a large container of chocolate ice cream, his favorite. George sat across from them, his own cup of coffee steaming in front of him, a data pad displaying what looked like military logistics information. And somehow, impossibly, they were having a serious strategic discussion about how the Sativ could contribute to Earth's war efforts. "The main issue," George was saying, scrolling through information on his pad, "is that conventional combat roles would require months of joint training exercises. But there are other areas where your people's skills could be invaluable." A spoon of chocolate ice cream appeared in front of Abi's mouth. He opened automatically, and the cold sweetness flooded his senses. Emily giggled and ran her other hand over his head, scratching gently behind his antennae in a way that made his eyes want to close in contentment. He tried to focus on George's words. This was important. This was about repaying Earth's kindness. This was about proving the Sativ were valuable allies. For instance, George continued, Earth's engineering core is currently developing new exosuit technology and working on personal shield systems. Your engineering team has different perspectives, different approaches. They might see solutions we've overlooked. Another spoon of ice cream interrupted Abi's response. He swallowed and managed to say, Our engineers are highly trained. They could definitely contribute to... Emily's fingers found a spot right at the base of his antennae that made his entire body relax. He caught himself before he started making that purring sound that Sativ made when they were particularly content. The compensation would be appropriate to their skill level, of course, George said. Standard engineering consultant rates, and they'd need to stay on Earth for a while, probably a few months at minimum to make meaningful contributions to the projects. Abi's antennae perked up at that. A few months on Earth, which meant a few months near ice cream supplies and these comfortable human laps, and... No, focus. This was a punishment detail for the engineering team. They'd converted the armory into a refrigerator. They deserved to be assigned to some tedious technical project. Putting the engineering team to work on a sudden project would be an appropriate punishment for what they did with the flagship's armory, Abi said firmly. A spoon of ice cream cut off the rest of his sentence. This time, it was a particularly large spoonful, and the cold hit his small head with sudden intensity. Brain freeze struck like a lightning bolt.
Ah!
Abi's paws went to his head, his eyes squeezing shut against the painful cold sensation. Emily made sympathetic sounds and rubbed his head gently.
Sorry, too much at once?
The brain freeze faded after a few seconds. Abi opened his eyes and glared up at her, though the effect was probably ruined by his large, adorable eyes and the small smear of chocolate on his face. He continued with what he'd been saying, though his voice was slightly petulant now. However, I would still prefer that we fought on the front lines like true warriors. The other species in the Galactic Council don't respect us. We need to prove ourselves in battle to earn their respect. Engineering support is valuable, yes, but it's not the same as combat glory. George's expression shifted, his eyebrows drawing together in what looked like irritation. His voice took on an edge that Abi had only heard once before, when George had defended the Sativ at the council meeting. Half of those species that mocked the Sativ were uplifted by others and never figured out spacefaring technology themselves, George said sharply. They're standing on the shoulders of species that helped them reach the stars, and they have the audacity to look down on you? There is nothing wrong with proving your worth as engineers instead of warriors, at least for now. We'll figure out something for your people on the battlefield eventually, once we have proper integration protocols. But for the moment, technical expertise is just as valuable as combat prowess. Abi opened his mouth to respond, to argue that combat glory was different, that warrior cultures needed battle to prove themselves, that... Emily fed him another large spoonful of ice cream. This one was even bigger than the last, and the brain freeze was immediate and intense.
Ah!
Abi's antennae shot straight up, trembling with the cold pain. His small paws clutched at his head. His eyes watered. Emily was immediately apologetic, rubbing his head and making soothing sounds while Abi recovered. When the brain freeze faded this time, Abi stared up at her for a long moment. She smiled back, innocently, her fingers already preparing another spoonful, though this one was more reasonably sized. He sighed, his antennae drooping in resignation. I accept your proposal, Ambassador Hampton, Abi said reluctantly. I'll send the engineering team to work with your military research division. The rest of the crew will remain with the ships, patrolling and ready to defend Earth if the worst happens. We may not be frontline warriors this time, but we'll contribute however we can. George's expression softened back into a smile. Thank you, Abi, and I promise we'll work on integration protocols for future operations. Your warriors will get their chance to prove themselves eventually, just not in this particular conflict. I'll arrange for security around your fleet, George added, to guarantee that the Sativ warriors don't suffer any accidents with dogs or children. Abby, his mouth currently full of another spoonful of ice cream that Emily had just fed him, made a confused sound. He swallowed quickly. Why would there be accidents with pets or children? His antennae tilted in confusion. Our warriors are well trained. They would never attack a human child or pet by accident. We have strict rules about civilian interactions. Emily laughed, the sound bright and cheerful. George just smiled, mysteriously. Just a precaution, was all he said. Abby wanted to press the issue, but Emily was scratching that spot behind his antennae again, and another spoonful of ice cream was approaching his mouth. And sitting here in this warm lap with chocolate ice cream and gentle hands petting him was starting to feel like heaven. He should probably get up. He should maintain his dignity. He should return to his fleet and begin coordinating the engineering team's deployment. But also, the ice cream was really good, and Emily's lap was remarkably comfortable. And the way she scratched behind his antennae made his entire body relax in a way that nothing else did. Do I need to lead the engineering team to your facility right now? Abby asked, trying not to sound too hopeful. His eyes reluctantly tracked to the ice cream container, which was still more than half full. George laughed, the sound warm and understanding. I'll lead the engineering team myself. You stay here and finish your ice cream. He stood up, collecting his datapad. Can you order them to follow me? Maybe give them a call on that wrist communicator of yours. Abby's antennae perked up as he realized what this meant. If George was taking the engineers, that meant Abby could stay here, in this comfortable lap, with this ice cream, for however long it took to finish the container. He tried not to look too enthusiastic as he activated his wrist communicator with perhaps more speed than was strictly dignified. Engineering Team Alpha, this is Commander Abby. Prepare your gear immediately for deployment. You're being assigned to assist human military research and development. You will be under Ambassador Hampton's direct command until further notice. This is a priority assignment. Acknowledge. George Hampton felt distinctly weird leading a procession of 50 colorful furballs through a high-security military facility as if they were his personal minions. The engineering team followed him in a loose group, their small legs working quickly to keep pace with his longer stride. They chattered among themselves in their high-pitched voices, their antennae swiveling in every direction as they took in their surroundings. Each one wore a small backpack filled with tools that were sized appropriately for their small paws. They looked like the world's most adorable tactical team. Every soldier they passed stopped to stare. Every scientist froze in place, their mouths falling open. One researcher dropped an entire stack of data pads, the devices clattering to the floor as she gaped at the parade of fuzzy engineers. "Oh my God, they're so cute," someone whispered. "Are those the Sativ?" another voice asked in awe. "Look at their little pom-poms." "I want to pet one." George found himself repeatedly gesturing at people to stop, holding up his hands in a keep-it-down motion. He'd learned during the Sativ's previous visit that they were sensitive about being treated as cute rather than as fierce warriors. They wanted to be taken seriously as warriors and professionals, and cooing at them like they were pets tended to make their antennae droop in embarrassment and frustration. Behind him, Bib noticed the attention and puffed out his small chest, trying to look professional and dignified. The effect was somewhat undermined by his naturally adorable appearance and the way his antennae bobbed with each step. They navigated through several security checkpoints, each one requiring George to verify his clearance and explain that yes, these tiny fluffy creatures were authorized to be here, and yes, they were actually engineering consultants, and no, you cannot pet them. Finally, they reached the testing facility, a large room with reinforced walls, observation windows, and enough safety equipment to suggest that dangerous experiments happened here regularly. George led the group to the main testing chamber and gestured toward the center of the room. A woman stood there, wearing what was obviously a prototype exosuit. The suit was bulky and mechanical, with visible hydraulic systems, power conduits, and armor plating. It covered her body from neck to feet, enhancing her strength and providing protection. She was currently running through a series of movements, testing the suit's mobility, while several other engineers monitored her from a control room. "There," George said, pointing at the woman in the exosuit. "That's our current prototype. We've been working on it for 6 months, but we're running into problems with power distribution, joint flexibility, and heat dissipation. Can you give it a look and perhaps suggest some improvements?" Bibb's eyes lit up with professional interest. His antennae stood straight up, pom-poms quivering. He turned to his team, his voice taking on a commanding tone that reminded George these cute furballs were actually highly trained engineers. "You heard the human! Everyone, analysis protocols! Go, go, go!" What happened next would be seared into George's memory forever. The 50 Sativ engineers exploded into motion. They pulled small devices from their backpacks, scanners, tools, diagnostic equipment, and swarmed toward the woman in the exosuit like a coordinated attack force. Before George could even process what was happening, he saw several of them produce what looked like miniature grappling hooks. They fired the hooks, tiny things with magnetic tips, at various points on the exosuit. Then they started climbing. The woman in the suit froze, clearly unsure what to do as 50 fluffy creatures suddenly attached themselves to her like furry barnacles.
She said eloquently. "Sir, what's happening?"
George opened his mouth to respond, but he was too stunned to form words. The Sativ engineers were everywhere. They crawled over the exosuit, their small paws working with impossible speed. George simply watched as they began disassembling the suit while the woman was still wearing it. Panel after panel came loose, removed by tiny paws wielding tools that looked like miniatures of standard equipment. Power conduits were disconnected. Hydraulic systems were exposed. Armor plating was carefully removed and set aside.
"Should I?" the woman started to ask. "Should I take the suit off? Should I?"
"Stay still!" several Sativ called out simultaneously. "We need to see how it interfaces with the wearer." Within minutes, literal minutes, the exosuit had been reduced to its component parts. The woman stood in the middle of the testing chamber, wearing nothing but her training outfit, looking utterly bewildered. Around her feet, scattered in organized piles, were the pieces of the exosuit, and covering nearly every surface were small, colorful furballs, examining mechanical components with intense concentration. George waved weakly at the woman, not sure what else to do. She stared back at him, her expression suggesting she was questioning her life choices and wondering if this was some kind of elaborate prank. George turned and walked toward the control room, needing to sit down and process what he'd just witnessed. He entered the observation room to find 3 human engineers already there, standing at the viewing window and staring down at the testing chamber with expressions of absolute shock. One of them, a middle-aged man with gray-streaked hair, slowly turned to look at George. "Sir," he said carefully, Did those tiny, fluffy aliens just disassemble our 6-month prototype in under 5 minutes?" George moved to stand beside them, looking through the window at the scene below. The 50 Sativ engineers had spread out across the testing chamber, each one examining different components of the exosuit. Bibb stood in the center of it all, directing his team with quick gestures and sharp commands, looking every bit the professional engineering chief, despite being roughly the size of a house cat. The woman in the training outfit still stood among them, turning slowly in a circle, watching the sea of colorful furballs work around her with bewildered fascination. "Yes," George said slowly. "Yes, they did." The 3 human engineers exchanged glances. Then they looked back at the window, then back at George. "Sir," one of them said, a younger man with glasses, Are they actually going to improve it? Or did we just let cute aliens destroy 6 months of work?" As if in answer, Bibb's voice came through the intercom system, high-pitched but authoritative.
These power conduits are inefficient. Routing is all wrong. And why are you still using this joint design? It creates unnecessary friction. And this armor plating is too heavy for the strength enhancement ratio. We need to recalculate the entire power distribution system.
The three human engineers stared at the intercom. Did that furball just identify every problem we've been struggling with? The gray-haired man asked faintly. I think so, George replied, watching their tiny paws work. Were they cute? Yes, absolutely. Adorable? Undeniably. But also brilliant, competent, and apparently capable of improvisation. The Sativ had come to guard humanity. They'd offered their warriors, their ships, their courage. George hadn't the heart to laugh at the offer, even though the image of tiny furballs defending Earth was objectively amusing. But now he was just grateful they'd come at all. Not for protection, but for partnership. Not as guards, but as friends, who could disassemble and improve your technology faster than your best engineers could document the changes.